Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about movies, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Christy Vogler.
I'm Colin McCormick.
And I'm Elijah Fleming.
And today we have a very special guest, Deb Trusty from the University of Iowa, where she is a lecturer. And today we are talking about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So this is our second go at a video game, and we are stoked for this one. So Deb, thank you for joining us. And our most important question we always start with is, do you dig this?
Oh my gosh. Hi, Christy. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. And yes, I do dig this. I love Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
How long have you played it now? Because I ran out of time to play it, and it has a lot going on.
It does, and this is where I'm gonna confess my gamer truths, I suppose. The type of gamer that I am is a puzzle, city building kind of strategy game player. So RPG, battling, that's not necessarily my gig. And add what does this have? 60 gameplay hours at least, just to get through.
Yeah, at least
to get through the minimum.
I think mine are each at 90, something like that.
Yeah, it's long. And, you do Origins, which is set in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and then Odyssey set in ancient Greece. And that's a lot of time. But I actually love and prefer even more, and is a better, I think, at least way to approach the ancient world for especially people who know nothing about it, is the Discovery Tour for either of these, Origins or Odyssey.
Yeah, so I think we're going to end up talking about both, because you've done something really cool and have used the discovery mode in the classroom, which is we're all teaching to some extent as well, and that was a really exciting thing to. I think I used a playthrough to show the Acropolis of the Periclean building project and everything, and in my Greek Civ class, and my students were stunned at how cool of a recreation it is.
Yeah, exactly. And the Discovery Tour is. So it's a violent free, right? No one's going to come in and attack you. You can you're a tourist in the world that they've created, and you can ask people and get tours and just walk around and enjoy the aspect of the game that they spent the most time on, which is really just researching, creating, going through all of the past scholarship. I mean, that in itself is an Everest of work. But then to put on top of it, a narrative game that you've got to play through that is set in an alternate timeline of this world where there's the cult of Cosmos and, just the general craziness of the Assassin's Creed world, adding to it. Why can I not remember the thing that sends them to the past?
The Animus.
The Animus, yeah.
Animus, thank you.
This game comes with you still have that framework, right? You get them into the past via this. I have thoughts about that in this franchise generally, but sorry.
Yeah, no, I think the Animus is actually thank you for reminding me. I think the Animus is a really, really good way of dealing with the issue of gaming in the past. So the Animus is the thing, right, that reads your DNA and sends you back into your ancestors' life, but then will desync you if you do something that is irrelevant to what they've done in the past, or it's so-and-so wouldn't have done this. Early on, the very first Assassin's Creed, it's Ezio wouldn't have killed an innocent person. And it's that's cute and adorable. He probably did a lot, but okay, you just don't want me to break your narrative and everything, and so it'll desync you and game over and reset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a brilliant way of coming to the problem of gaming when it comes to games set in the past. What do you do with I can't do this in the past. I shouldn't act the way that I would in Call of Duty or some other sort of game, right? I'm not just going to blaze in there, kill a bunch of people or whatever it is. But instead, they want you to stay on a path that's going to recreate history somewhat logically. Mm-hmm. So I think that's actually a brilliant way of coming up with gaming in the past, is have them not be able to deviate from a certain line.
To know, considering we only made it I'm very similar to Deb in that, like, I can do puzzle games. I can do some RPGs that where button mashing will allow me to win a battle. But this
Super Smash
whole
Brothers.
Remind
yeah,
me not to play you in Mortal Kombat.
yeah, no,
No,
this
Super
whole
Smash Bros. Is the same, where you just hit a bunch of buttons and great, life is
yep,
wonderful.
yep,
But when I've got to hit a certain
combo
sequence,
and
yeah.
You
blocking.
got to time your dodge
What?
just right.
Yeah. Plus, I'm sure you're like me, where you're the old school gamers, where you're used to like Nintendo, right?
Mhm.
And you don't have a joystick that moves your head and another joystick that moves your body. And I end up walking as if I'm like a Picasso picture or something because I can't look and move at the same time. So I'm
Yep.
finally getting the hang of it now, but I just don't have, I guess, the patience for a 60-hour game if I get frustrated and stuck at a certain battle. And I would much rather just see the pretty and cool stuff that they've created with this game, which honestly makes this world so much better than any other representation, any other movie of the ancient world that I've seen, because I get to go and see the things and I get, agency in the game. I can do what I want and see. And that's why I like the Discovery Tour, because I can go through, and if I want to follow their path, fine. But if I want to go over here and watch some guy making pottery, I can do that, which I really love, that they show all just the hoi polloi, the humdrum of the regular world in the ancient past, which we know as like researchers and lecturers and teachers is the hardest part to reconstruct for students, is what's the normal person doing. We know what the rich Alcibiades guy is up to, like there's plenty of information on that guy, but what about the normal dude that's working for a living, or the woman in the home? What's her life like? And we finally get little pieces of that recreation with Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
I love that.
That was the problem I was having with, like, usually it works to have Andy do the hard fighting stuff.
Yep.
But then Andy wants to fight the 10 assassins that have shown up. And I'm like, can we go back to the temple and I look at the wall art for a minute?
Are you getting to the point where you start hearing that horn whenever there's a mercenary after you? It's like, darn, and that means there's like a really tough guy like right in your vicinity, and that was my
just
every
hand
time
off
that happened,
the thing. Just hand it off.
I would out loud. I'd be playing the game and I hear the darn. I'm like, oh god, I'm in the middle of something right now.
Well, and it's our world, right? It's like the thing that we've been spending our entire lives researching. And please don't make me fight a guy right now. There's something really interesting over here. A woman is on a loom. I want to watch that.
Yeah. The thing that always happens to me, I'd be going around and I'd say like, oh, a thing that I know is right around here. Let me go in, and then I walk into this happened. I know the example, the Hephaestion, which is a restricted area in the game, and I'm like, oh, then I'm going to go to the Temple of Hephaestus in the Agora, and I'm like, oh, I'm actually trespassing, and there's my wanted level has gone way up. So now I got to run around and hide in bushes.
Which, I mean, we do know that area was well gardened thanks to archaeological evidence. So it's nice to be like, that's right, you did that, but now I got to hide in this bush for a while, which we know archaeologically existed thanks to all of the work of the American School at the Agora.
Yeah.
No, Eli, you've been awfully quiet. What's your read on this game?
I feel like I have the least amount of experience in video games. It was like never part of my childhood. I never had a gaming system. It just like it wasn't for me. And I have really struggled trying to connect with a lot of my friends who are really into games, and my husband who loves video games. And I think I have been reluctant in the past to like take any sort of leap, but in the past like year or so, there are so many cool things that you can do and see and experience in a video game that is very different than a movie. And I think I've always thought of like a movie as like, oh yeah, that is my ideal media consumption, is a movie or like reading a book. And this is something in between. And so I watched a whole lot of playthroughs for this. And I remember when I taught a Greek Civ class in 2019, so it was like right after this came out, I had students come up to me and were like, "Oh my God, have you played Assassin's Creed Odyssey?" And I was like, "I am not that cool, but I'm glad you think I am, I guess." But I had students in my class come up, like, be so excited of like, I like met this character, like I met Sophocles in the game, and like I met Herodotus, and I'm playing this game, and I was like, that's cool. And so I learned from my students. They came and they showed me some of their playthroughs of mainly the temples. They were like, look at the temple of Heracles that we were just talking about in class. Look at this cool reconstruction that they did. So I have had just like a really kind of a crush on this game, where I'm just like, I want to be involved with it, but I haven't been able to, get an actual playthrough myself. But I really would like to somehow. And I think it's so cool to use this as a teaching tool, because I think the students are already there. Like, it's something that they already have this language with and this familiarity with. So I love the idea of using it to sort of talk about the ancient world with them.
Yeah, when I started teaching at Florida State University as a graduate student, I was teaching classical myth, and I had students. I'm not going to date myself too much, but I'm going to say the 2000s. I'm just going to leave it at that. In that decade, I had students coming
A
up
millennium
to me.
in which we are still in.
Yes. Well, we're in 2020s, but the aughts. How about that? I'll leave it at that decade, like in the aughts. And I had students coming up to me even then, and were like, "Hey, have you played Age of Mythology?" And I was like, "No, but I played Age of Empires a ton because that's my jam type of game."
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, "Oh, you'd love Age of Mythology then." And so I finally played it actually on my Twitch channel as a way of being like, "All right, you guys have been begging me to play. My students have been begging me to play this for like 15 years. I'm finally going to play it." But until then, I was just like, "Okay, you guys are really into this sort of thing. It's not going anywhere anytime soon." It's fun to watch, like, I don't know, documentaries that are like, "Oh, and everyone thought this was just a fad." And it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's a huge billion-trillion-dollar industry. Consoles are huge. Steam is huge. I mean, it's not going anywhere. And it's a newish way for us to relate. We used to do classics and cinema courses, right? And be like, this is how you can relate, you young people. And now I don't see why we couldn't have a classics and video game, or classics and board game, classics and gaming in general, right?
Yes.
These are ways that we're retelling history and myth from the ancient world to make sense of our own world in a way. And so it's doing the same things that like Plato and everyone else is talking about, that tells us in the past. You want to have entertainment, sure, but you also want to teach. And movies, myths, why not video games too? So that's my pitch for video game classes.
My mythology class right now is kind of a backdoor that class, because it's a lot of I spend a lot of time talking about Hades. I spend a lot of time talking about mostly Hades, but a few other games. I haven't brought up Phoenix Rising yet, but maybe I should. But on sort of a pivoty thing, because we were talking a little bit about the sort of role of agency, which is kind of the main difference that really separates video games out from other media, is the role of like player agency, that you can affect choices. And that was a big, even in the arc of Assassin's Creed games themselves, was a big sort of objective for the design team. This is a Ubisoft game, and they're one of the bigger game studios right now operating. We would call them probably a AAA title. This is a classic example of a AAA title. But in contrast to previous Assassin's Creed games, which are a little bit more linear, this game was deliberately designed, and it was designed sort of in concert with Origins. They kind of were in development more or less at the same time, and then Origins came out just maybe a year ahead, and it was almost like a test run. But compared to other Assassin's Creed games, this one has a lot more sort of choice consequence, like sort of choice trees that result in different results, different endings, people live or die. But then, as we were sort of talking about, that sort of kind of almost runs you up into this problem with a sort of game that's so rooted in history. Well, like, there's a ceiling kind of on your choices. And this leads me to actually, I'm a little bit of the naysayer, and like, I have my sort of take on this game is I think it's a really great representation of ancient Greece, but kind of a mediocre video game. Because I think there are better examples of this kind of game, but I can get into that later. but this sort of problem where like, okay, like I can go here, see this, but I'm sort of almost like a fly on the wall of history, which is cool. But then at the same time, like the history is still going to play out more or less. Like the plague is going to hit Athens, or Sparta's eventually going to win the war. Phidias is going to die. Pericles is going to die. We're kind of working in and around. We're sort of massaging how they die and things like that. But there's sort of this, there's like sort of bumpers on our lane, if I'm going to use a bowling analogy.
Like hard rules. There's hard rules and there's soft rules. Hard rules are people got to die. People got to be present. You can't just take out Alcibiades.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would. He's
amazing.
By far
He's the best.
the most drama like that guy's made for Hollywood. I feel like there's like real life of Alcibiades is just something that would hit.
Yes.
I think
Christy and I were literally texting about this. She like sent me the video that's like all Alcibiades cutscenes. I was like, just watch this.
It's perfect. It's just like, yes,
beautiful.
that's my Alcibiades. It's this like reckless, lust hungry, very emotional, very unbalanced. Like you can see Socrates just being like, I'm so doomed. I'm in so much trouble.
And his horniness for Socrates, which I did like. That's also like
so good.
that Alcibiades was very horny for Socrates in a way that sort of defies logic.
Yeah.
I taught Greek Civ last semester, and I told him, it's like, you guys, we're going to get to my favorite figure in Greek history. And unfortunately, it's not a woman. It is, in fact, this man.
As much as I love Aspasia in this.
Right?
Well,
Yeah.
She's great in this. Or Aspasia, if we want to do.
I love the pronunciations of all the names.
The modern Greek pronunciations are so much better. They're just... And I love this about this game. They got voice actors from Greece or that were modern Greek speakers, and let them do what they want to do with it. You say it in your words. We can't say how, and I don't think we should say how ancient Greek was spoken and hold that as a truth forever. Languages change just like myths, just like everything else. So let the language speak for itself in its modern context. And I love like Socrates instead of Socrates, which, it's just, it's so much more passionate.
Euripides. I was like, that is exactly how they would say it in the modern, but I've never considered saying it that way.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what Alcibiades was, how they said it. Alcibiades, yes. You just gotta like roll it off your tongue. It's just like this,
Ali for short. I'm like, when they like you get a pet name.
On the note of voice actors, so Melisanthe Mahut, who voices Cassandra, but you might recognize her. She was in Eurovision. She's the Greek. I forget what her character name was.
Of course she was. Of course she was in Eurovision.
Yeah.
Love it.
I forget what her character's name. And the other one, Michael Antonakos is Alexios, but then Elias Toufexis, who we've talked about on this podcast because he's the voice of Seraphim in Blood of Zeus.
Right.
And there's a story that when he auditioned, his audition was reading scenes from The Godfather, but in an accent. And he basically said, like, I just used like my grandparents' accent.
Oh, I'm dying.
It's so good.
And they also had for all of the dialogue, like this game has a lot more dialogue than a lot of other Assassin's Creed games, because one, there's just a lot more dialogue options, and two, because you need it twice. You need it one for Alexios and one for Cassandra. And there was a Greek actor who basically read all of the lines, like all of dialogue out for the other voice actors who weren't Greek, so they could have a consistent pronunciation schema.
Just the attention to detail is spectacular.
I was doing, speaking of attention to detail, like occasionally, like I had a moment where the one thing where it's so good, except when they get to the pediments of temples and the metopes. And the first thing I did in discovery mode is I climbed up the side of the Parthenon and I was like, these are the wrong metopes.
Stop it. That's exactly what I did too.
0 stars out of 5, would not recommend. No, it was good because, and then I think they used all of the ones from Olympia.
Yep.
Or basically they just copy.
They just copy paste. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Which like, there are limits. I understand.
But the Acropolis, the temple.
Come on.
I mean, this is the thing that like only a classics PhD is going to notice.
Exactly. And I think that's what they intentionally did is they were like, look, let's save time where we can save time. but let's show the detail when we need to. So other good example is like the Athena Promachos statue on the Acropolis. That thing is not that big. It's not like 100 feet. From what we can tell, 40 feet max. Because it's pure bronze. And yes, okay, you can see the glint from Piraeus, but Piraeus is only 7 miles away. It doesn't need to be giant, huge, like towering over the Propylaea, for example. Probably wasn't. Like, so those little things are like, was it that big? But you know why they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
Because monumentalism, Hollywood, we want to have the sparkle, the like monumentality of everything. We want to make it big and sexy. And it can't be big and sexy if it's 3 times larger than a human.
Right.
And this is, for example, they talked about they deliberately made Sparta fancier than it probably would have been in real life. And even like sort of famously in Thucydides, he says something in the very beginning of his history of the Peloponnesian War where he's like, if you went to Sparta in 100 years afterwards, and you would probably think it wasn't a very important city because there isn't a lot of physical remains there. And even today, Sparta is a fairly modest city, and you would not necessarily suspect that they were as important as they were. And so there's a decision, because Sparta comes with so much baggage in, particularly since 2007, but so much sort of cultural baggage in the modern sort of American or North American or Anglophone world, that they sort of they pumped Sparta up. And they did this with other stuff too. Like, one of my kind of, not misgivings, but a thing that sort of bugged me is like they added stuff elsewhere that in some ways kind of undermines the real things. Like, there's, for example, in Cephalonia, there's a insanely massive statue of Poseidon, or like some of the stuff they invented to kind of make Greece feel more mythological or epic or monumental kind of undercuts that, like, because like in the game you wouldn't think the Parthenon was that special, because there's other stuff that's like more impressive in some ways.
Yeah.
And then there's stuff like, if you go to around Delphi, there's a temple where there's a skeleton of a gigantic snake.
Yeah, that was the part where I was like, yeah, you guys are kind of losing me now.
Really?
Like, you're jumping sharks here, or jumping snakes.
Yeah. Well, but then there's in addition to the sort of animus conceit that underlies the whole franchise, it's because it's, this long, sequences of games of people having to go back in time and to re-experience historical events, because there's a secret war between secret societies. And I want to talk about that stuff in a minute. But there's also like an ancient aliens bent to these games, because they're trying to discover alien artifacts that let you like control people or give you extra technology.
Yeah, I don't like that part, Colin.
Shocking that people don't like the ancient aliens argument. However, I will argue, my students always are like, aliens, it's a BS, thing. I'm like, yes, I agree. Like, obviously I'm with you on this, but the Greeks had their own theories that kind of were ancient alien like theories of the mythological, like the Cyclopes built this. No human could build this. The Cyclopes build it. That's why it's called Cyclopean masonry. And that's just because they couldn't believe that earlier peoples couldn't move these big rocks. And so we have the same thing. So I think it's interesting to see like this continuity of human disbelief in previous humans. And we attribute it now to aliens or whatever. They did the same thing, shockingly.
I wanted to ask you guys about the Hollywoodization, I guess, as I think you kind of brought that aspect up, because I definitely noticed a lot of, I don't know, callbacks to like 300.
Yeah, the 300 looms really heavy in this game. Like the opening sequence, the kind of tutorial level, is basically a reenactment of 300.
At least they put armor on them, though.
At least they did.
Yeah.
But there's also like Spartan kick is like one
of
the things you can do, right?
Yeah, like to kick people off cliffs or high ledges or something, which I will say is at a certain level kind of deeply satisfying when I line up and like kick somebody off the side of a boat or like off the side of a cliff.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like there's definitely like they're also working within, and we talk about this a lot on the show, of the kind of the meeting point of like what we know via text or archaeology or other sort of academic means, and then sort of how we understand the past via popular media or things like that. And like a game like this is trying to sort of meet somewhere in the middle, and the incorporation of the 300 or the incorporation of 300 the movie is an example of like that.
Yeah. I was just thinking how reflecting because we've been doing so much Roman stuff lately, but it's Roman history that so much of the events are, and there's like some Roman myth aspects that never get put into film because they're almost crazier than the Greek stuff. And then so much of Greek history is this myth history that they've generated, with 300 being kind of the weird exception that is one of the few historical touchstones a lot of people have through media is, oh yeah, Leonidas, he has a spear, he died at Thermopylae, and that's all I've got. And that,
This
like,
is
the
Sparta.
Peloponnesian War is fascinating. But we haven't, and like that's I besides like being excited that Alcibiades was in here, like I have said forever, it's like, why is there, we have a movie of Alexander, why can't we get Alcibiades? Like it would be excellent. It'd be
Yeah.
so much fun.
That man's
And
a
like
train
no one
wreck. Like,
touches
come
it.
on.
A
James
train wreck
Franco.
I wanna
James
watch.
Franco.
Oh my goodness.
James Franco as Alcibiades.
Yeah, it would be like one of the. I'm trying to think of like a comparable movie, but like a movie about a person who's like a complete like you said, a train wreck. He's a hot mess express.
He is the
Like-
definition of failing up
Yeah.
until
but, like,
he just
it's-
can't anymore.
What, like Death and Loathing in Las Vegas or something like that? It's just
Fear
like
and Loathing.
Fear and Loathing.
Yeah.
I can't even remember movies.
This is our other sort of larger call, is that not all movies necessarily need to be action adventure, sword and sandal. Like there's rooms in the ancient world for other genre, like comedy or or like I don't know why, but I keep thinking about Lady Bird or something. Like I don't think Alcibiades is particularly like Lady Bird, but something like that, about like a person who's like kind of figuring stuff out, or maybe is a little bit, I don't know, or like
accidentally successful almost.
I think
Yeah.
Silicon Valley when I think failing
Ooh.
upward.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
You just like
that's a great
walk
example.
into something and you're like, oh crap, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I guess it's working.
Leonardo DiCaprio then? James Franco?
Ooh,
Yeah.
Like
yes,
I
can
feel
see
like
this.
those guys both.
Yes.
So this might be a good. We talked about Alcibiades a little bit, but the other sort of like one of the staples of Assassin's Creed games, particularly starting with 2, although it's a little bit in 1, is like you go back in time and you're this assassin and you get to meet historical characters. Like in the first game, you get to meet like Richard the Lionhearted and maybe Saladin. It's been a long time since I've played it. And you meet other historical characters, but they're like nobody anyone knows about. Like they're just, a lot of the people you kill in the first game are like actual like crusaders and princes who actually did die around that time, but they're not like, you wouldn't really recognize that, Guy de Lusignan or whatever.
Yeah. And well, and then you go to the American Revolution even. And
Yeah, and you get to meet like George Washington.
yeah,
and Ben
exactly. That you're like,
Franklin's
these are
building.
real people. And
Yeah, or like there's one in the French Revolution, and
Mhm.
there's one in like industrial
18th century, 17th,
yeah,
19th
like 18th
century
century
England.
London.
Yeah.
Yeah, like and so that's like a staple. And so one of the reasons they picked the Peloponnesian War is because it's this real sort of concentrated period of big names, Socrates, Alcibiades, Euripides. So anyways, this is a long walk for me to get to like your favorite characters, who'd you like interacting with in the game? Are there any depictions like we really sort of thought nailed it or maybe didn't nail it?
Herodotus is actually one of my more favorite ones, just because he kind of follows you around, or you follow him around. Like the two of you are pretty close throughout the entire game, and it just kind of feels like that whenever I read Herodotus, that he's like this flashy guy, wants to really talk about what he knows. Wants to talk about himself and what he knows and show off how much he knows. Wants to give you advice, is clearly like, that's how I feel Herodotus would be after reading his work. So I feel like that's one of the characters that they just hit home. And for me, this is my like nerddom. When I found out that they were making an Assassin's Creed set in Greece originally, I was like, oh, well, there's no way that they're going to go into my time period, which is classical and earlier, because they have Origins, which is set in Roman Egypt, right? Like you see Julius Caesar. I was like, man, it's called Origins. They're not going to go back any further than this. I'm never going to see my classical Greece. This really sucks. And so there were rumors out there that it was going to be like Roman Greece, right? That, well, we're going to show Roman Greece. I was like,
Ugh.
oh God, like that just sounds terrible. This poor like country or group of people or group of cities that used to be great and now are stuck under like this leadership and are forced into like basically become college towns and have to deal with these like college brats from Rome coming in every year and taking over their city. It's like Iowa City or anywhere else. Like, oh man, here we go again. That sort of thing. So I was really bummed. And then I remember they showed an E3. They did their premiere at E3 showing the trailer, the very first trailer with detail. And they just panned over Athens. And I was like, this isn't Roman. This isn't Roman Athens at all. And then you start hearing like cutscenes and they start talking. And I hear what sounds like Herodotus or Thucydides or something of like someone's reading something historical. I was like, oh, this is set in classical Greece. This is set in classical Greece. And I just like screamed throughout the entire household. I was like, it's set in Greece. It's set in real Greece. Oh my God. And my husband, not an academic, not an archaeologist, doesn't care about Greece, just sat there and was like, what has happened? Who is this person that I have married at this point? That I'm like, I can't believe it. I'm so excited. Like jumping up and down the house. People are like, my dog is going insane. Legitimate geek out moment. And I can't tell you just how happy I was just to hear it's going to be in classical period Greece, which for everyone is like 490 to 332 BCE. And oh man, it just was such a breath of fresh air. I really didn't want to see Roman Greece. Ubisoft, don't do Roman Greece.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me back to, it's like that's just it. It's like Greek history. Like, we love the myths, but history is so entertaining and so amazing to discuss, and there's so many interesting figures. Like, I still love teaching all of my students that the first woman to win an Olympics game is Caniska, a Spartan princess.
I got that question
who
right
couldn't
on the
actually
tour.
officially compete, but she bragged like she was the shit. And I'm like, yes, this is what I'm here for. And I understand that excitement of like, and that was why I was like, Alcibiades, I was so excited about. It's like, this is such a character. Why does no one want to portray, we can get a bunch of Hercules, we can get a bunch of Achilles. There's so many interesting people who were real historical figures. Why aren't we talking about them and showing them, like, because they're fascinating too. But we'll do Julius Caesar and we'll do Marcus Aurelius and all of them again. Roman people all the time.
Yeah, I feel like Roman myth suffers this, like you were saying, Roman myth suffers what Greek history suffers. Because there's no good Aeneid out there.
Yeah,
like,
true.
There's no good Aeneid. Where's a good Aeneid? We have plenty of Odysseys. They're not really good, but they're fine. Like, we don't have a good Aeneid. Yeah, we don't have this good Greek history. The Peloponnesian War itself is just, it's so deep, I think, that it would be hard to unpack in a movie. But this game, I think, does a really good job of it, and showing and moving on the Assassin's lore or saga or whatever in a way that's also useful. Like, the Cult of Cosmos is an interesting idea to me. I like it because of the idea of the corruption of Pythia or Pythia at Delphi. That idea is something that, they were very concerned about. They were obviously very concerned about corruption of Delphi. And you can see it in the archaeology. Athens does it all the time, where they're like, we're going to give you a temple, Delphi. Please tell the Spartans to leave us alone or invade or do whatever we want them to do.
Right.
Alcmeonids.
Yeah.
So that sort of stuff is like, oh man, they really understood. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they hired an actual archaeologist to do the research and to do the work. So her name is Stephanie Ann Ruada, PhD in ancient languages, right? She's from France, which is perfect because the Ubisoft company that was in charge of this one, the branch, was the one in Montreal.
Montreal?
Yeah.
I think,
so they
origins were Quebec's, I think.
Yes,
Quebec
yeah.
City.
So they needed like someone French speaking, and when I first started to try and figure out how I can use this in the classroom, my husband actually recommended, he was like, why don't you just email Ubisoft people and see if they'd be interested in providing some information. I was like, there's no way they even care. There's no way. They're not going to care. They're a big company. They're not going to care about this. But I did it anyway, and lo and behold, got an email back from them, and started talking to a couple people. They actually have a branch for outreach and education, to try and get their games more into the research and school side, education side of things. So they provided, they said they could provide us with a bunch of stuff. They provided me with a bunch of resources, scripts, basically, images, all of that stuff. But it's very clear, and they told me, like, from the very beginning, they were using archaeologists for information on how to recreate this. And so they hired Ruata full time in order to make sure that they were being as close to truthful to the information as they could within the limits of their medium, within the limits of their goals as well. You want to make it entertaining, so
and they mentioned too that they took, like, I think Ruata was kind of was the guide kind of, but they took a 10-day tour of Greece where they went to Athens and Crete and Sparta and a couple other places. And then there are other sort of experts and archaeologists and historians came in to kind of fill in the details. But yeah, this is a very sort of research heavy game. And you can see it even in that discovery tour. I only really started doing that this week to sort of prepare for this episode. But yeah, like every sort of tour, they give you the sort of breakdown of the site. And then there's like would you like to learn more? And you kind of like can pull up and you can read a little bit about whatever it is, myth or history.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm going to return to sort of the initial sort of question about sort of other characters that they're depicting. Because I want to also, we mentioned Alcibiades, we mentioned Herodotus, but I feel like the other big one is Socrates.
Mm-hmm.
And what we thought about Socrates.
I mean, you have to say, like, okay, we got to have a pug nose kind of guy, a pig nose, pug nose kind of guy, right? We have to make him look like a satyr. That's what everything says in, like, the symposium when Alcibiades is, saying that the origin of love is Socrates himself, because he's just this man that you can't resist. Ugly at first, but beautiful on the inside, right? And I feel like they do a really good job of making him the mystery of a guy that he is, the legend of a guy that he is. He just feels legendary in that way, the way that they've reconstructed him. But
I think they kind of got that he's equal parts sort of intelligent and obnoxious.
Yes.
Where, you do want to, like, at a certain point, you're like, Socrates, you talk to Socrates long enough and you're like, I'm going to
punch you in the face. I wish that, my students were really mad actually when they found out that they couldn't punch anything in discovery mode. So when you're in discovery mode, you can't punch. And they were like, why can't I punch this guy? And I was just like, sometimes you can't.
One of my hot takes, one of the first times I had to teach a sort of Greek text in Greek was the first thing I think I ever taught was the Apology, which is like, I am not a philosopher. I'm not particularly well-versed in Greek oratory or prose. And I'm not a really big Plato fan, admittedly. And like one of my hot takes was like, if I lived in Athens and was a citizen, I would have condemned Socrates.
Oh, like, yeah.
I would have been like, yeah, get this guy out of here. He's the worst.
Yeah.
Because he comes up onto the city and he's like, what do you think goodness is? I'm like, I don't know, man. And then he's like, do you think you're a smart person? And you're like, I'm like, maybe. And then he's like, well, I'm actually the smartest person ever. The Oracle told me so. I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, dude.
Yeah, exactly. That you're like, okay, we get it. You think you're all hot. That's great. And then, of course, on your trial, I kind of wish that, like, we got to go to Socrates' trial or something in this, because that would just be classic.
Awesome.
And we don't even see Alcibiades as sort of main.
We don't see his downfall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because this is because this game is set in 430-ish. It plays a little fast and loose with the time. Because I think like the first time card you get is like 432. But like some of the events, like the
we're building up to the war. We're not there. And then all of a sudden we are there. And then we're in this liminal zone and you're like, oh, it's the plague. So I must be in 429, 425. Because we know like there were ebbs and flows to this plague.
Mm-hmm.
And we get Amphipolis, which is another thing we have like a hard date on. And there's another battle scene. But yeah, we get some hard dates. So it's sort of like, it's my thing. It's happening over a sort of indeterminate period of time. But yeah, Alcibiades were at least maybe 10, 15 years-ish out from his big sort of, I mean, the thing I always think about when I think of Alcibiades is famously one night in Athens, a bunch of sacred statues these herms got mutilated or graffitied or destroyed overnight, and maybe he was
Castrated,
involved.
if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, somebody went around knocking all the phalluses off the statues.
Herm
And
choppers.
Somewhere there is a basket of penises, stone
Mhm.
I
penises
love
somewhere,
it.
and I
So
just I want to know.
It's in the
And-
Vatican. That's where it's
yeah, that too. But yeah, so Alcibiades. Yeah, so we don't quite see Alcibiades fall. We don't see Socrates' sort of fall. I'm trying to think of other characters.
I think
we
the
see.
inclusion of Hippocrates is very interesting too, because unlike some figures, like we have the Hippocratic corpus and the Hippocratic oath, and we have this guy who's starting he's starting rational medicine. He's starting to become a treatise, but we don't necessarily know a lot about the guy himself. And so to see him personified is really interesting. And he's, being your healer, so to speak, to help you out with some things.
And this is one of those cases where I think the game does a lot of maybe like shorthand kind of thing, where like he sort of behaves like a very modern doctor in a way that even maybe the historical figure Hippocrates, as far as what we can, because like Chris was saying, some of the texts attributed to Hippocrates probably not by Hippocrates or probably written much later. He acts a little bit more modern than we probably would expect.
Mm-hmm.
The other instance I was thinking where that really stood out to me is anytime you interact with like actors in the game, like there's a couple of quests where you have to like get an actor to do something, and the sort of the way because one of my interests and things I know most about in the classical period is theater, and the way they do theater is more like how we sort of think about modern actors or theaters or stuff like that. Like I don't think we see them with masks, or maybe we do, or maybe we don't. Because there's one point where you basically have to restate. You have to help Aristophanes basically put on the knights, which is gonna like be his big middle finger, like the public teardown of Cleon,
which I love.
Mm-hmm. And so there's like a mission where you have to go and you have to find his best actor who's like drunk in a bar or something, or like confessing he's like went out. You have to, or like to get him to perform, you have to go to his like favorite Hetaira and like get her to help out or something like that.
I love that like some of the side quests are, I would call that almost mundane. It's like, it's not like some of them are like, go kill this person or like go find this treasure. But some of it is just like, go drag this drunken actor out of the back of a bar. And it's Eli, so normal.
If you like mundane gameplay, I need to introduce you to the best game I think is the greatest game on the world but that is Red Dead Redemption 2, where like you literally have to cook your own meals every day.
Yes. Also where you can like run your horse so fast that if you run into somebody, you kill them.
I feel like.
Oh, well, Yakuza game you can play like the claw game. Like there's like
you play, or you go and you like you go to baseball like batting cages.
Mm-hmm.
How boring is that? And yet it's one of my husband's favorite things to do in that game. Is that one or do karaoke in Yakuza? That's another one of his favorites.
Anyone who's ever played Witcher 3 knows that it's not really a game about a monster hunter. It's really a game about a card collecting game inside.
Gwent. Oh my god.
Yes, Gwent. Gwent is the best game.
There we go.
Yeah.
Andy's all about all of anything where you are gambling. He will find in a game and spend like an hour doing. I'm like, why?
Yeah, there's so many games that I was like, this would be a better game as just the mini games. Can I just have the mini games and not the actual game?
Amazing.
Yeah, this is.
But Eli, actually, like for real, like Red Dead Redemption, I actually do think is the greatest video game and also the best adaptation of the Odyssey. But that's for another show.
Oh, interesting. Interesting theory you have there, my friend.
I'm gonna come back around to that later.
No,
but like that's there's a lot of like mundaneness, but actually I think that really like bakes you into the world and you get really involved and like you get sort of integrated with it. I forget where I was going with this. We were talking about Socrates. We were talking about, you see some other famous figures like Sophocles and Euripides. I was a little bummed that I thought Euripides got short shrift because he's my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really much to do with Euripides. He's just kind of there.
Yeah.
I just want to, like, I'm of the humble opinion that for all of his plays he created, he must have been consulting with women to some extent. Like, I'm saying he's kind of proto-feminist, and he had to have, like, really actually considered some women's voices, because especially a lot of his characters his main protagonists are women. And like some of the things they're saying is like, gosh, that rings true in a lot of ways. And so like that could have been, yeah, I agree with Colin on that assessment that they really shortchanged him because I like.
Well, he's also still a few years out, right? Because his most famous plays are not going to be for maybe another 10 years
until
or so.
much later. Yeah.
However, I will point out one major anachronism, which is the Erechtheion, which wasn't finished until 403-ish. So after the war was over, it finally gets finished, and they show it full. On the Acropolis, completed and everything. And I get why. I mean, you can't not show the Caryatids on the Acropolis. It's one of like next to the Parthenon. It's the second major like thing that people take their photo next to, even though those aren't the real ones up there. People, it's okay.
Well, and that's something that is very interesting. Like you talked about the setting being in the classical world with the Peloponnesian War, even though the Persian War is probably what is most famously in American minds, at least when talking about. And I've talked about this in my class before of if you go up to the Acropolis today, there's been many buildings that have been on top of that Acropolis over the centuries and millennia. And it is what does Greece choose to exude as representative of their culture? And it's very distinctive. And that is what has been brought into this game. And I think we've talked about that with Blood of Zeus and other things too. When you're recreating the Greek world, you're kind of just focusing on what is the most popular imagery in the imagination. And you can't have the Acropolis without the Erechtheion.
Exactly.
It just doesn't compute.
Yeah.
And like similarly, like even in Rome, when Mussolini sort of engineers the Forum, he says like we want it to be Augustan, even though all of the temples and stuff that you can see in the Forum today are from like the 3rd and 4th centuries or later. He wants it to be we dig down to the Augustus level, when Rome is top dog, and no further, or no less, and things like that. But on the sort of the flip side, we've talked a lot about Athens, but there's the wider Greek world that you get to go to, and the part that I was particularly interested in, one of the sites that I want to go to first is, as I say, Epidavros in the game, because when I was at the ASCSA in the American School of Classics in Athens, I had to give a field report at Epidavros, and so I know all about it. And I noticed when I went there, I'm like, oh, they're still constructing the Tholos temple, which is right, because that wasn't finished until, and there was something I remember, the temple construction there was waylaid because they ran out of money or something like halfway through. So like they built a bunch at first and then they had to like piecemeal it together. And so it had this like kind of lurch to the finish line the rest of the way. And so I went to when you go to all the Hippocrates sort of quests, and I was like, oh, they're still building the Tholos temple. So I'm like, that's right. Like it would still be sort of partially completed. And the Abaton is there, or like part of it is there. Which, there's like little attentions to detail that actually I occasionally go. I have a reverse story about another site that I hate, but I'll talk about that later.
Ooh, I want to know though.
Yeah, tell us.
I'm just going to come out swinging.
Is it Mycenae?
No, Mycenae's a little weird. It seemed Mycenae was kind of unrecognizable to me.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just because it just looks very different in the game than what it's like in real life now. But no, the site that I'm just going to come out swinging. Gla, I hate that place. Gla can suck a huge donkey balls.
That site today is a huge disappointment. Like I feel like I don't know what to do with Gla, honestly.
So Gla for basically everyone, because is this site? It's a Bronze Age site of a huge city that used to be kind of near Thebes, but today,
but not Palace.
Basically, yeah,
because we're gonna build a giant fortification wall around a not palace site.
And it's like in this lake, but today it's basically like it's in the middle of this like drained out what used to be a lake, and it's drained out. And I just remember getting like walking across this like basically desert up to this hill, and it's the summer in Greece, so it's like 100 degrees out. And they're like, this is Gla, and it was like a huge city, but we don't really know anything about it because it's never mentioned anywhere. But we know that there's a huge city here, or a fortress or something. And I'm just looking, and it's just like a bunch of rocks, and I'm just like, this place.
Yeah. It's out in the middle of nowhere. Nowhere. This is coming from me, a Mycenaean archaeologist, who is just like, Gla is a weird and not great site to go to.
Glah, more
So
like blah.
yeah,
Sorry,
that's
that
actually
was
the
my joke.
ongoing joke is like
That
blech.
yeah.
And you said it's near Thebes, right? I remember like we did when I studied abroad to Greece, we did a trip to like northern Greece and we did Pella and Vergina and things like that. And then our buses got stuck somewhere and my Greek professor literally he's the one who taught ancient Macedonian history. He's like, this is the armpit of Greece. And I'm like,
Oh,
So it's Florida.
Yeah.
I can say that
And
having lived in Florida for
I just
12 years.
I remember playing the game, and I think my partner might have been right next. She might have been right next to me when I did this, and I saw that like the map icon, like when you discover a place, it like glows up, and it's like you found, and it went glow, and I went like out loud. I was like, F- "This."
You just throw your controller in the air. I'm done.
Yeah, I was like, and the other thing, the one thing that didn't make into the game that I'm bummed about was the Temple of Apollo at Basai, the one in the
Oh
middle of
yeah,
Arcadia.
the one out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, because
That's
that's a
not
funky.
there?
No, and they don't have Mount
What?
Lycaon either, which is another like minor grievance of my own.
Yeah.
But yeah, because that's like one of the Temple of Apollo is like a weirdly interesting temple because it's got like every style and there's
Yeah.
like it's built in a very bizarre way.
Well, it was built by Peloponnesian mercenaries too, of like war mercenaries that were like, we have too much money. So maybe their logic behind it is like, well, it may not have been built right around like, but it was built by Peloponnesian mercenaries, people that were making way too much money off of the Peloponnesian War. So yeah, that's an interesting one for sure.
I was like, Gla makes it in, but the Apollo, I'm like, well, all right. Again, 0 stars, would not recommend.
See,
It is out in the middle of nowhere.
I really want to go see. Okay, because I haven't gotten that far. We did the Palace of Odysseus on Ithaca, and that was pretty fun because I was Mycenaean, and it was like, okay, this is cool. I like this. So I haven't gotten much further than that. But then I saw, like, I watched some video clips with Alcibiades because that was my jam, and they're like, oh, Olympia is a sight to behold during like the truce time, and I'm like, isn't it just basically like a giant Woodstock event with a bunch of sweaty athletes and then people are camping out?
Yeah, people are camping outside. Like Woodstock is a good way to describe it. Plus
Yeah.
it's low and swampy and it's gonna get covered up by a bunch of clay and silt after the Christians tear down the temple. And yeah,
You're like,
it's not in the best
that's a sight to
location.
see.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's the thing about like romanticizing the past that Hollywood does really well, video games do really well. I do appreciate Assassin's Creed for making everything look dirty. However, like
Yeah.
it's not clean and pretty. Things are pretty rough, and Aspasia or Aspasia is very straightforward about how much it sucks to be a woman in ancient Greece. So kudos to her for that one of just being like, no, we don't leave the house. The only reason I do is because I'm not a citizen of this city and I get to have sex with Pericles.
She's kind of killing it, all things considered.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, dude, talk about failing up.
And sort of this also kind of leads me just to the idea of like at the more kind of narrative level that this game there was a conscious decision basically by the creators to be like, look, that we're like, so the main character or sort of the not the default but the sort of intended character, the main character is really Cassandra. And then even though Alexios is the one who sort of promoted in all of the imagery and the promotional material and things like that, it's really like sort of Cassandra. And you can kind of tell when you play that like the game was designed with Cassandra in mind as the sort of default character, and this idea of being a woman in ancient Greece, and even just like the romantic relations and like sexual relations that you can have. They basically made a decision of like, this is going to be a point where we're going to think our heads are going to be in 2020 or 2018, less so than 430 BC.
Yeah, because I mean, this image of her in armor, right, is not something that you would see in ancient Greece. But I appreciate like that they're wanting to give the player this option of putting themselves in there. Like mercenaries were a thing. Yes, I don't know of any female mercenaries in any of our records. That would be an interesting thing to hear about.
in the game at one point, like Cassandra. So the 2 times I've played this game, I was Cassandra both times. Mostly just because like I don't feel Alexios's energy or whatever. He just doesn't.
He is fun to watch flirt with Alcibiades. I will give you that much. If you just want to watch that happen, it's great.
I have a hard time imagining Cassandra as the what is it, Deimos figure, as like the murderous psychopath.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
Yeah, sorry. But like, so as Cassandra, like I actually like win the Olympic, but like the player can win the Olympic Pancration
right.
as Cassandra, which is again like a thing that like never would, but like whatever.
They drag you out. It would be it wouldn't even start.
Maybe she's the one who disguised herself as a man, and that's why they had the rule that everyone has to now do the Olympics in the nude to make sure.
Yes. I love that that's Cassandra. The excuse. Why do we have to do this nude again? Because a woman tried to do it one time. Doesn't matter. Take off your clothes.
I do appreciate that they went with her being Spartan, though, because that does much more jive with kind of the independence that was given to Spartan women as opposed to Athenian women. So
yeah, I definitely don't think you could do this as an Athenian woman at all. But yeah, you have the Spartan woman mentality of having more of a say, right? Having more of an impact. Oh, she's almost like Gorgo in that way, I feel like, where she's like, ooh, she can actually like talk to men and tell people what's going on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it just from the beginning. It was like there was no like real question of her being like any less terrifying. It was like the first thing she does is like beat up some thugs, right? And it was like, oh, yep, that's just who she is. She's a badass, and I love it.
Yeah, it's the voice actor is amazing. The whole thing is very well thought out, very well written, I think. So I like that intentionality. Yeah, they have intention. And I can tell and see what they're doing. They've planned this out. They even, they, like Colin was saying, they sent their team to Greece to see everything. And so this is my argument for students of like, this is why you need to study abroad. Look, even Ubisoft sent their staff before they made this game because they knew they need to set it in this world and they can't do it from just pictures. You have to experience this world, modern or ancient, to understand what you're going to show truthfully on the screen.
I love that.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, needless to say, Stephanie Andrew-Wada, you had my job. I would love to work for, I don't know, a company. And this kind of brings me, I guess, then into a segue on like, how do we use this in the classroom? Because my thought was like, how do I get my students to have basically Ruwada's job? What do I need to do because video games, anything, honestly, is much better when you have the background and you understand what's going on and you have at least some understanding or at least appreciation for the source material. It doesn't matter if it's ancient or modern, if it's like a documentary or a drama on the screen or on the stage. You need to know where this is coming from. You need background and you need context in order to represent it faithfully. And so for Ubisoft to go off and get an archaeologist to do this and to show them, look, this is truthful. And so what I want my students to learn basically is what do you need to know to get a job like this, to be influential, to be the background for the big makers, the creative people. How can you guide the creative people?
You get on a podcast and you say, hire me, please.
Yes, exactly.
By
the way,
we're doing
hint,
right
hint. I did that. I don't want it to be like, too begging and blunted, but please. But that idea of like, and actually video game, there are, they're private university, not even universities, but Full Sail is a school in Florida, a university in Florida.
She's doing air quotes.
Yeah, those are air quotes. In Florida, that actually does hire myth and archetype historians who can basically show there are archetypes in this world that we've come up with in mythology, across cultures. Let's give our video game designers, and our Full Sail helps video game designers achieve things. They send people off to like Skywalker Ranch to do a bunch of stuff. And
Wow.
yeah, it's a huge like in the movie and video game industry, and they know that, so that school hires people, archaeologists, people that know classics, people that know these fields, in order to teach them, here's the background you need to know. And so for Ubisoft to like send their entire staff to Greece just so they can get that experience screams a load of information to me as someone trying to tell their students to go to Greece, because look, it's going to give you that context that you need that I can't give you in the classroom. I can only get you so far in the classroom, but until you're there and you're standing in front of the Parthenon, do you understand the scale of the thing and meet the people who are descendants of these people or just live around this stuff on a daily basis? Do you finally understand the ramifications and the importance of a site like this?
My favorite experience is going into an H&M and going to the checkout, and you look down. I think I was in Ammonia, looking down, and it's a glass floor, so you can see the ruins that are below your H&M store. Like,
exactly. These are the things that I love. Like, you're in a metro station, and then all of a sudden there's an ancient like bridge in Monastiraki. There's a bridge underground that you're just like, that's the coolest thing, guys. I can't believe this is right here. And as Americans, especially, from an American standpoint, we look around and we're like, yeah, there's nothing old here. Well, that's because like a lot of the things that Native Americans built were biodegradable. It was they using baskets and soil and wood and structures that we just don't see anymore unless you're a trained archaeologist and know what a post hole looks like. So Greeks are building with stone, and you just walk around Greece and you look down and there's a piece of pottery every time you step on the ground.
A PSA to our listeners, though, don't walk home with that piece of pottery.
No.
Because they
that's a bad thing.
Yeah, and the Greek government will come after your ass.
Or at least should. Yeah. So yeah, to go back to that context about like Sparta and the way they recreated Sparta, I was actually impressed that a lot of the things they made in Sparta for this game were actually what looked like to me to be wooden. A couple of the temples were like kind of ancient looking, much older looking wooden temples, and I was just like, yes, exactly. We think about like the evolution of temples, and we don't have that early phase because that early phase was wooden. That's why columns look like tree trunks, and why Minoan columns are recreated as upside down trees, basically. That's what they used, and we just don't have those anymore. So it's interesting to me to watch this kind of, well, if we need to show some fidelity to Sparta, then let's make the stuff that maybe is going to biodegrade. Let's make it mud brick. Let's make it wood. Still big as hell and really impressive, but wood, which I appreciate a lot.
And I was just kind of thinking that, like, thanks to Rick Riordan and Percy Jackson and all of that, like, it feels like there's going to be a whole new wave of the classical world coming into media. And
there already is, for sure.
Yeah,
all of my
we're in it.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's also with this dilemma on the other side. Like, I have a small class of archaeology lab, and I have them like, all right, here's what archaeologists produce. It's a field report. That is what we are required to produce for the public.
I'm sorry, I fell asleep at the mic, Kristen.
I know, right? And it's like, how do we compete with ancient aliens, with video games, with, like, we want to use Deb's word, fidelity. We want to be as accurate as possible, but that is not going to get across to the public in the same way that these other, some people, Ubisoft does it really great, or, tries really hard, but then you have History Channel, and what do you do with that? And so, like, how can I think archaeologists and other scholars really need to find these ways to integrate into popular media. Like, we can't just dismiss it anymore. And I guess throwing it out there, what is everyone's thoughts on that, especially Deb? that's what I loved and wanted to bring you in for, was you took this medium and it's like, we're going to teach with it and give it some
legs.
There you go, something like that.
Yeah, I also gave it some more context too. As much as Ubisoft does a great job putting it into its historical perspective, I felt like my students needed to understand the sources that Ubisoft was using. And so one of their assignments actually, so the way that I basically structured the class is that it was a first year seminar. So at the University of Iowa, all the first years need to take a seminar to learn, just basic skills, but also it's kind of like a cohort that they can become friends with and everything. Unfortunately, I taught this in the fall of 2020. Yeah, I had written a grant in 2019 and received about $6,000 to put Xboxes in the classroom. Sweet, everything sounds great. We get it all set up, it's ready to go. Spring of 2020 rolls around and we've got the room in working order. I start writing a syllabus and then COVID hits. We suddenly are all working online. And so I actually only got one class with students in person using the Xboxes. And for the rest of the semester, we had to have them use the game, just the version of the Discovery Tour, not the full game, which Ubisoft gratefully provided all of my students with free codes for, because they were like, that sucks that you guys are in the pandemic and you can't play the game now. Here's free codes for you so that you can play at least Discovery Tour. So they got to play Discovery Tour that way. And then we met on Zoom, which is a terrible way to show a game. And they would basically, before class, read ancient sources. And so a lot of it was Pausanias, but then there was also some Herodotus as well, and a lot of Thucydides as well. So we're trying to recreate everything using our primary sources.
Hello, listeners. This is Colin. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we do not have the final minutes of our recording in our initial conversation with Deb Trusty. However, you can find Dr. Deb Trusty on Twitch and YouTube under Dr. Debitage. That's DOCTORDEBITAGE, where she and her friends play video games influenced by classical civilization and mythology. And with that note, we are going to sign off. As usual, if you enjoy listening, you can find us on most streaming platforms, including Apple, iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Stitcher. Please like and review, and please leave us a review, especially on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out. And tune in next week, where we are going to be joined by a very special guest, Liv Albert from Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, talking about the BBC original show Atlantis. And with that said, bye!